Welcome back to another edition of the Scarlet and Gray Report podcast in the middle of just a historic day of sports news, whether it's James Harden to the 76ers, Ben Simmons to the Nets, or even the there's no more DH in baseball, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to talk about a collapse of Ohio State basketball and something that really just didn't surprise me, or I don't know if it surprised you, but let me introduce our guest real quick. He's been helping us out here at Scarlet and Gray Sports, this Scarlet and Gray Report. It's Jack Emerson of The Lantern. He's the sports editor of The Lantern. How's it going, Jack?
Going well. I'm happy to be on here.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So I want to open the door for you. What was your thought, I guess, with 3 minutes to go in the Ohio State Rutgers game yesterday? Because it seemed to me that there was a point that, Ohio State's offense was kind of dead. It was dead in the last 6 minutes, but it seemed like defensively they were doing enough. Like, at what point did it kind of change for you? Were you like, okay, this is not going to end well?
I think the point where I realized, well, hey, I think this game is probably going to go Rutgers' way was after that shot clock violation. I think that was like a minute and a half left, somewhere around there, where Jamari was kind of just holding the ball up at the top of the key, and then they kind of ran some kind of set for EJ, but it didn't really seem like they really had a plan of what they were doing with the ball, and EJ just fired it quickly over to Malachi, and he just had to eat it. I feel like that's kind of where the game where I was like, okay, I'm going to have to start writing my losing story, because I had a winning story written all ready to go. And once that play happened, I was like, they just look out of sorts. It looked like the rat kind of got to them. And that's kind of where I was like, that's the turning point.
Does that surprise you at all? Because I guess for me, you're looking at this team that, you've seen at their best, they're probably top 5 team in the Big Ten, like at their best. You saw them at their best. They're late against Purdue, but it's too sporadic in my opinion. Did that kind of collapse surprise you at all late in that game?
I was not incredibly surprised, especially just with the nature of the game, with how it was kind of back and forth for most of the way until that 4-minute mark where they went up 8. But I was not terribly surprised, just because of what we've seen this team do early in the year. And, I thought they were kind of getting over that hump of like, oh, hey, maybe these games are going to be less difficult, or maybe where they were getting over that hump where it was like, hey, we've kind of figured things out. I thought that was apparent after the Purdue game, but obviously, they clearly weren't. Last night was just a different team. It felt like after the 4 minutes, at the 4-minute mark.
Yeah, absolutely. You saw a little bit of a preview of that there in the first half. There was 4-minute scoring drought that, nobody could get a shot off. And then that was the kind of point where it's like, okay, this is, because there's always points with Ohio State basketball where it's like, okay, you have a team that's doing enough, and then they kind of just fall off the bandwagon for 5-minute period, 6-minute period, and then they kind of regroup. That's Ohio State basketball. That's what happened against, I remember early in the season games against, I don't have their schedule out in front of me, but one of their, who did they play? I know it wasn't the Bowling Green game, but it was one of the first home games of the year. Go ahead.
Niagara.
Yeah, Niagara. Yeah. In these early games where it was Akron, actually. You saw these early games where, there was a stretch of, okay, this is how Ohio State should beat this team. They should beat them relatively handedly, but they played down or they kind of just lose that spark, lose that energy. And I don't know if it's based on the offense. I don't know if it's based on just the amount or the lack of experience, especially in that starting core together with, young guys. I think Malachi Branham and Michi Johnson get a lot of attention because they're freshmen, but I think you have a guy like Zed Key who he's a sophomore. And I think people forget that. They think he's an old veteran compared to, say, Malachi, and then you have a guy like Jamari Wheeler, who's a first year. Yes, he's a redshirt senior. He knows how to play Big Ten basketball, but he hasn't played with this team before. This is a team that is not used to playing together, and they haven't played a lot of games. So, I mean, there's always that point in these games, and you saw that early on in the year, especially at home. You saw that regroup against I mean, the peak example is Duke. I mean, you saw that team play at its best when it needed to. That's the only time they've won a game where they trailed at halftime. And then it's just kind of sporadic. It's up and down. It's kind of a roller coaster of sorts. What do you think? Because I've been trying to think about this all day. I thought about this in my story last night after the game, is like, what does it take to change it? Is it just experience, you think? Or is it kind of just I don't know, is this what this team is?
I think experience is going to go a big way or a long way. And, obviously they have tons of experience on this roster. I mean, you have Arndt, who's been here for 4 years, Kyle Young, who's been here for 5 years. So you got to hope that, and EJ, obviously, who's been here for 3, but you got to hope that kind of leadership kind of steps up in the big moments. I think it's kind of weird. I kind of feel like this team is so similar to maybe some of the earlier years of Holtman, like the years with where Caleb Wesson was kind of the centerpiece, not in terms of makeup, but in terms of kind of just like how they are as a team, because, I remember watching that team and they would have those like 6-minute stretches where it was like they just couldn't produce offense at all. And you saw that last night. And I don't know if that's something that comes down to coaching, if that's something that comes down to just kind of how the roster is made up. But I feel like this team has the leaders and they have the vets to figure it out, figure out these little issues. And I think that's kind of to your point with them kind of regrouping. I think that's kind of where that comes in, where you've got these vets who are like, hey, what's going on? We're just not playing the way that we normally do for the last 3 minutes. And I think last night it really just came that moment where they kind of lose everything on all the offensive end. It really just came at the worst possible time. And I think you got to attribute some of that to playing at the rack, because obviously we know how hard it is to play there.
Yeah.
But also I think it could just be kind of just how the game of basketball works too,
Yeah. And and it's super interesting that you bring up, because I'm pretty sure you're bringing up the 2018-19 team, because they did have Keita in 2017, which was kind of, he was the EJ kind of the time. And this was a team that was built around the paint. This was a team that was, it had CJ Jackson, but CJ Jackson was this guy that was kind of a distributor. He was like, he was a scorer, sure. He had 12 points per game. I'm looking at his stats now, shot 40% from the field, but he wasn't kind of the offense. That was Caleb Wesson down low. That was, Keyshawn Woods off the bench, kind of providing a little bit of a spark, but that was like Kyle Young's first year, kind of a bigger role. You had guards like, it was the first year of Dwayne Washington, Andre Wesson, which, offensively, he wasn't much, but he provided a little bit. It was a team that was kind of centered around one offensive guy, and they really didn't have that second piece, which I would argue at this point, Malachi Branham is the number 2. And if he could play every single one of his games like he plays on the road in the Big Ten, I think Ohio State would have that. But because he just plays different. But so he might be a little bit more of a number 2 than this team. But I understand what you're saying, because they need an answer. They need somebody outside of EJ Liddell, but especially when, he's getting a bunch of attention. And I think, and it wasn't even the amount of attention that EJ was getting. It was just the amount of attention that Rutgers had on stopping Ohio State down low, like with their length. And they were giving them threes, and Ohio State was hitting threes, but it wasn't consistent enough where it's like, okay, to keep a lead, especially when they couldn't go inside. Zedke was having a lot of trouble, which we're planning to talk to Ryan Peden later this week, which I'm really interested to seeing. We talk about this every time we talk to him, is Zedke's development and things like that. But if Malachi's the 2, if EJ's 1, Malachi's 2, does there need to, there what we saw last night, there seems to be a need for another option. There needs to be another, and I think it has to come from the paint. Do you see kind of a similar thing? Is it Zedke, do you think? Is it Kyle Young? Because I think he can, I know Chris Holtman doesn't make a huge deal of starting lineups. And I mean, and it doesn't really matter to him who starts, but does Kai, I mean, what's the answer here? Because I don't think it's from three.
I agree with you, because I definitely agree that there's the scoring hierarchy now. They're going to give the ball to EJ when they want him to work either inside or, I mean, obviously they run high-low with him all the time. So, I mean, he's obviously your Swiss Army knife. And then you have Malachi who knows how to get to his spots. And he's just so impressive because he just seems so refined, and he's so, what's the word? He's so cool and collected, even when he's playing in these insane environments. Like, what do you have? 20 against Purdue at Mackey. He had a crazy game at Mackey. He had a great game last night. So I think I agree with you with the fact that I think they need to kind of attack the paint, because that's where their strength lies. Obviously, with Arns, it feels like he's getting his rhythm back, so maybe that could be a nice little step up. I feel like Cedric Russell is a little underutilized. I think he can definitely get some more touches and more minutes. But yeah, I agree that I think that production that they need kind of has to come from maybe like a committee style. Like, obviously Zed, when he plays well, the Buckeyes are at their best. I mean, obviously you saw it during the Duke game. He didn't play terribly last night, but it just felt like he got less assertive as the game went on.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think that kind of needs to come in committee with their front court players, with Kyle, with Zed. And I mean, I could see them getting a little more involved, especially Kyle, because he's kind of developed into someone who can really score from anywhere.
Yeah.
If you give him the time and you give him the space. So I think it's definitely going to be interesting to see what they do going forward with kind of their front court guys outside of EJ, of course.
And I guess one more question before we move on to some other topics. And I'm going to put you on the spot here because we didn't really talk about this before, but what's this team's ceiling at this point? I mean, obviously there's still a lot to learn, but if tournament play, whether it's actually, let's start with the Big Ten tournament and like say Big Ten tournament and NCAA, what's this team's ceiling in terms of a path? What do you see at this point? We're going to learn a lot about this team moving forward because there's a lot of games in just a very short amount of time, but what's their ceiling here?
That's a really tough one, honestly, because this team has been really kind of hard to figure out to this point. Yeah. Because, you mentioned the up and down nature of them. If this team gets hot, it's hard to beat them. That's the thing. I mean, you saw it last year in the Big Ten tournament. I mean, the team just got hot, and I mean, they were pretty unstoppable. They beat Purdue, they beat Michigan, they beat some top tier opponents. And obviously they don't have that factor of a guy who can really get hot like Dwayne Washington Jr. could. But I mean, you have EJ Liddell, who's a consistent 18 to 20 points per game scorer. You have Malachi Branham, who really could serve that role that Dwayne did. I mean, their ceiling right now, I would say their ceiling is a Sweet 16 team. I don't think they're really a contender. I think they can make some noise, maybe get out of the first weekend, something they haven't done with Holtman yet. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they lost the first game like they did last year too. They're just so hit or miss, like how you mentioned.
This is a team or a program that is in need, desperate. I wouldn't say desperate need, because I think you see a recruiting class coming in that's kind of, it shows progress and it shows that Holtman is not done, but a Sweet 16 appearance needs to come soon. Yeah. And I think, and you have a fan base, at least from what I was reading on the board, like after last night, especially, that it's a fan base that are like, yeah, Ohio State needs to get there or something's not right. So it'll be interesting to see. But there's a lot of time and especially, heading into this weekend, the first thing that I see, and we won't go in depth on this, but when you see, Michigan, you're like, okay, Zed Key versus Hunter Dickinson. That's the big one. It's a physicality down low, which is something that I still don't think that's going to be the X factor here. Can Ohio State survive with a 6'9" center? And I think that remains to be seen. And I think you'll see if they can, especially with late games. Ohio State sees Michigan again. It sees Indiana again. It sees Illinois and Kofi Cockburn. You got, Michigan twice. And then you have the Big Ten tournament where, it's just a gauntlet of teams. Those same teams that I said are teams that Ohio State are like, face. So that's going to be where, yes, you can have EJ Liddell. Yes, you can have Malachi Branham, these similar guys that you get smaller guys, but it'll be interesting. I think the X factor is, can Ohio State survive without a true big, which, I mean, Chris Holtmann has said in the past, he's like, Zed Key's our center, but I mean, based on size, I mean, he's not a center compared to Zach Edey or Hunter Dickinson. Let's just put that out there. And I think that's true. So I guess with that in mind, I guess let's go back to football, because I've gotten a chance to talk to you off air, and we've had plenty of content between me and you on Scarlet and Gray Report about the early enrollees and about the new coaches. And we got to talk to them last week, and we're still kind of parsing through and trying to understand, okay, this, like, what their place is and things like that. And I want to get your opinion. Who was a player, and we'll do the same thing with coaches after, but who was a player that really stood out to you? You're like, oh yeah, this guy is the real deal.
I mean, I'm going to mention it because obviously CJ Hicks, just because of, you know, what he's just such an impressive guy. I mean, what he did in recruiting, what he's done as a player. He's just, I mean, he was a great in front of the media. So, I mean, he's an incredibly just impressive person overall. But I also want to mention Kai Stokes was somebody who I was really impressed with, just because of, you know, he's kind of got that funny, like, attitude with him, where he's really easygoing, lighthearted, and I think it's really a really endearing quality. He was very sorry, I lost my train of thought. He was very sorry.
Like, no, I mean, like, was he, I mean, when I talked to him for a short time, and I mean, he kind of matches that kind of quality of the Ohio State defensive back aura, like of the past, like viewing himself as this like kind of ball hockey and safety, this guy who wants to be in the middle of everything. He was talking a lot about just comparing himself and being around. He's like, I get to be around Josh Proctor. I get to be Josh Proctor. And you see this guy that's like, that knows the tradition of Ohio State, knows a guy that really hasn't been a major part of Ohio State in the past year or so, but a guy who's like, yeah, this is the veteran I want to be. I mean, do you see that potential? Does that excite you, like, for the Ohio State defense? Does Ohio State need a guy like that?
I think so. And I think he's in the perfect spot learning behind Josh Proctor. Obviously, you know, the comparisons have been there since he was recruited.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think he's in a great spot. And I think, you know, kind of that addition of the Knowles defense, being able to also work with a guy like Tanner McAllister too, where you kind of get that that understanding of the defense as a freshman. I think that's perfect. And I think he's in a great spot. I could see him, I don't know if there's really the room for him to contribute right away, like there was last year with some guys, but I mean, I could see him really becoming somebody that will be a household name for this program.
Is there a guy that you talked to that could make that freshman impact that was made last year?
I really liked what I heard from Cade Curry, and I think the opportunity is there for him to, you know, I mean, obviously Zach's coming back, but he's one of those guys that's really versatile. You can kind of play him anywhere on the line. And I just thought he was really impressive with how he's kind of carrying himself. You know, I think he knows that he is a talented individual, and he knows that he can make noise, but he's also, you know, I'm here to learn. I'm here to, you know, get better. So I think that's going to be an interesting factor. And I could see him really getting out there in the fray as a freshman too.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And I think he views that too, because he's kind of carrying himself in that way where it's like, yeah, I could play. I mean, he's like, yeah, they've been talking about me playing the Leo. Like they've been talking about it. It's either going to be the Leo or defensive end. I want to be like Nick Bosa. You see this guy that, I mean, he's not cocky, but he's a guy that knows his ability, knows his worth, knows what he wants to be. And I mean, because you saw a kid out of high school that's like, he could be molded into whatever Ohio State needed to on that defensive line, whether it's, I mean, you heard kind of rumblings of, okay, do you build him up to play in the middle, like at D tackle? Does he stay athletic and play the end? It was kind of this versatile option that's like, okay, where is Caden Curry going to lie? And you have, and to hear him say, I'm an athletic defensive end. I will play defensive end or I will play Leo. I want to be like Nick Bosa. Okay, he's not playing D tackle. He's not going to be built like a D tackle anymore. Like, and I think that versatility, especially when he was talking about the amount of techniques that he played. So it was like 0 technique, 3 technique, like all these things. And then also having the experience of playing middle linebacker, you have this guy that can do everything. You have this guy that was a stud out in Indiana high school football, who all he did was winning. I really do think that he could be on the field first. I mean, the more I think he was not my pick heading out of the class. That was Tegra Shabola. I think he could have. I still think that he's going to be one of the first ones out there. But based on what I heard from Caden Curry and based on the way that they are taught, the coaching staff, and the way that, people surrounding the program are talking about him, and based on Jim Knowles' track record of developing Leos from their freshman year, Colin Oliver was a stud for Oklahoma State last year. I mean, could that be Caden Curry this year? I really do think so.
I was going to mention that, and you bring up a great point with how he's just kind of perfect for that Leo position. He's athletic, he can move around, he's smart with the way that he plays. So, I mean, you hit it on the head. I think he's a perfect fit for the Jim Knowles defense. And I think it's interesting because, he comes in, not even really knowing that Knowles is going to be his coach, not even knowing that, hey, I can play this Leo position that kind of puts me anywhere on the field. And, it's interesting because he kind of just fell into a perfect situation, it feels like. And I completely agree with you. I could definitely see him filling that Leo role right off the bat.
And I remember talking with him and his family and just being in that high school gym, like during his his commitment. And you saw, it was pretty clear it was going to be Ohio State. I mean, people knew that, but I mean, you're probably 45 minutes from Bloomington, and there's this guy that they're like, nope, he's going to pick Indiana. He's going to pick Indiana. No, he's not. I mean, he would have been a star for Indiana. I think he's going to be a star no matter where he goes. But I mean, this is not a kid that's meant for Indiana. This is a kid that's meant for Ohio State. And he didn't get all the attention. He's not the highest kind of heralded prospect that Ohio State is getting out of this 22 class. But I think he could really be one of the most important. And I'm very, very excited. I mean, him and CJ Hicks. I mean, you have probably two of them kind of building blocks of what this change could be. Because, I mean, you take away I don't have to go on in depth on this, but I mean, you look at not only the Leo position with Brock Martin and Colin Oliver, but you have the will linebacker spot at Oklahoma State. You saw this kid, Malcolm Rodriguez, just go bananas. Like, he was crazy. And these numbers that he put up, I mean, Hicks fits that perfectly. If you look at the build of the will linebackers for Knowles at Duke and at Oklahoma State, I mean, they're built similarly. CJ Hicks is built similarly. Steel Chambers is built similarly. These guys that can probably fill that role if they get in the room with Knowles, which they will. I mean, it's their position. So, I mean, there's a lot of promise here. But again, I really do think that Caden Curry is at the center of it. And kind of in the same vein, I kind of want to ask you about Knowles. I mean, what was your impression of him?
I'm a huge fan of kind of his approach. I love the game show idea because, it really keeps it keeps his players on their toes, that you have to know your stuff or else, hey, you're going to get put on the spot. You got to know it. You got to know your assignment. You got to know your things. So I think he has a really smart approach to coaching. It's a different approach to coaching. And I am all for it because I think it's just something that, allows a way to bring kind of fun into it, but also, it's just a way to get schemes down, get memorization in. I am really impressed with him. I really like his defense, and it seems like the young guys who we talked to on last week really enjoy the aggressive style that he's employing here. That was something that I heard from, I believe, Ryan Turner was like, hey, we love the aggressive style that he has in this front seven because it helps us back here. So I mean, I'm a huge fan of what he brings to the table. In terms of his scheme and in terms of the way that he kind of handles himself and handles coaching, young men.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. And that's one of the things I wrote about this week is, I mean, using that game show example and kind of that, I mean, it has to be instinctive. It has to be ingrained into the players. And that's the only way it works because there's so much kind of versatility within the same looks that you're like, I mean, you can't think about it. And that's where he's getting to. And that obviously takes time. I mean, it's not mastered right now, and it's not going to be. I think it was, I mean, it's so funny when you go up to a kid and you try to ask him, like they were with Jim Knowles maybe like an hour, and they're like, okay, what's his defense look like? I mean, the only one who really truly knows what it looks like is Tanner McAllister. No one knows what the hell. They're like, no, I guess it's fine. Like, I guess it's aggressive. Like, so it'll be interesting to see how they adapt the young guys, as well as, I mean, that spring game is going to be interesting because you might see some confusion. You might see some kind of not full understanding of what this defense can be, but you see it as a work in progress, which I think is going to be exciting for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really cool. That spring game is going to be very interesting to see just everything on the defensive side of the ball. I think we know what we're getting with on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, you got all those returns back. Obviously, there's going to be some key receivers that'll be fun to watch. But I mean, when you look at this defense and just all the young guys and all the potential and the scheme change and everything, that's obviously going to be what headlines the spring game. And I'm really excited for it because I think it really gives an opportunity for one, we get to kind of see Knowles' defense a little more in action with guys at Ohio State. But two, kind of just see who's really fitting in and who's kind of gotten it as quick as possible. And obviously they only get 15 practices going through, so it's not going to be perfect, like you mentioned. But it's going to be really cool to see just kind of who steps up in their roles, who kind of fills that Leo role, who fills that linebacker role, like you said. And I'm really interested to see how the transfers play in that game as well, especially Tanner, who's already been in that defense, like you mentioned.
Tanner, and then Diamante. I mean, Diamante is, he's going to be an interesting case, and I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what his role will be on the defense, because that room seems very, very, very full, especially with only 2 spots. But it'll be interesting to see how much he plays and how he looks as a linebacker, especially having played it in Akron during his high school days. But before we go, I kind of wanted to ask you this question, because obviously the Super Bowl's Sunday, and it's a big deal around here, especially with the Cincinnati Bengals and a lot of Ohio State alumni. One of the things that has been on my mind ever since Cincinnati made it to the Super Bowl, which, oh my God, like it's crazy. Like, I mean, just to think about, like, just, who would have thought? I mean, obviously, like, I mean, I grew up in Houston, so I mean, they were never going to make it. And, but like, I mean, to see a team not named the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Buffalo Bills or the Kansas City Chiefs in a Super Bowl is just wild to me. Anyway, obviously it's a point in the recruiting calendar where coaches can't talk to kids. They can't, it's a dead period until March when kids can start coming in and visiting the program. However, you have to think based on obviously they can't like go out and say this, but based on like, what the Super Bowl is, based on who's playing in the Super Bowl, this has got to be one of Ohio State's biggest recruiting weekends in a long, long time, right? Like, am I crazy for thinking that?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, you got to think about it. The Super Bowl is going to be a 4-hour-long advertisement for Ohio State Buckeyes. I mean, you got so many contributors on that Cincinnati team that are Buckeyes. And you just, as a recruit, I think you got to watch that and be like, I want to play there someday. I want to play in this game someday in my football career. And, these guys all went through Ohio State. And you can even, I mean, I know LSU fans like to, not say Burrow's a Buckeye. Burrow's still an Ohio State graduate. So you see guys like that, excelling like this. I mean, you got to think that it has an impact on guys that they've been targeting for a while, especially right now.
I think so. I was going through this sound today because, spoiler, I will be writing a story on this here shortly. But I mean, if you when we talk to Devin Brown, it doesn't matter if Joe Burrow is a Buckeye. It doesn't matter if you view him as an Ohio State quarterback or as an LSU quarterback. He's actually both. It just matters to Devin Brown. Joe Burrow was developed at Ohio State, and he sees himself as Joe Burrow. He sees himself with that same moxie, that same kind of confidence, that same kind of demeanor where he can be a leader. He can be kind of this hyped up kind of almost close to, I don't want to use this word, but I can't think of any other one, but almost arrogant kind of presence behind center. I mean, if he sees himself as Joe Burrow and he sees Joe Burrow as this Ohio State quarterback, I mean, he wants to be next in line. And for an Ohio State quarterback room that really hasn't had a lot of professional success, I mean, we'll see. I mean, Joe Burrow's been obviously the best as of this, as of recent memory. You have Justin Fields, who I'm sure, I mean, we're waiting to see still what he can do at the next level. But I mean, you have other guys, whether it's, JT Barrett never really made it. Cardell Jones never really made it. Twain Haskins, I mean, a little bit remains to be seen, but he really never made it, even though he was kind of that professional, I mean, pro style thrower. I mean, that was when I was in your shoes, Jack. Like, I mean, when I was covering the team, that was a quarterback I saw. And I mean, you thought by every single game he played, it was like, yeah, that's an NFL quarterback, but it just never came to fruition. But to see a guy who, and Devin Brown, who's like, yeah, I want to be the quarterback like Joe Burrow was, maybe not in Ohio State uniform, but was developed in an Ohio State uniform to kind of shine at LSU. I mean, that's all Ohio State needs. As long as the name and the brand of Ohio State is muttered, it doesn't even need to be that loud. But that's all that Ohio State needs to take advantage of this weekend and have a bunch of kids, whether it's 2023 prospects or on down to say 2029, 2030 prospects that are coming up. They're like, yeah, I want to be an Ohio State Buckeye. I want to play so I can get to this game. It's huge. And I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is the other guys on that roster, whether it's Von Bell, whether it's Eli Apple, whether it's Sam Hubbard, Isaiah Prince, like these guys that were in it. I'm going to specifically focus on that defense because one of the things Ryan Turner told me when we were talking about him or we were talking at his interview was like every single corner that he watched as a kid. And I view it as like Sunday Night Football on NBC where they're like, yeah, Joe Burrow, LSU, like they say these names in like their school. Every single corner that he saw was like Eli Apple, The Ohio State University, Marshawn Lattimore, The Ohio State University. And there's a point where it's like, he's like, yeah, I want to do that. I can be that. Ryan Turner, The Ohio State University, he can be the next one in line, And I think that that's such a huge selling point that Ohio State has and something that they will, because obviously it's Ohio State. They're arrogant, so they're going to take advantage of it this weekend, which is going to be incredibly interesting and incredibly good for this area. Everybody watches the Super Bowl, but everybody in the Columbus area is definitely going to watch the Super Bowl this weekend because of it. And I'm wondering before we go, do you have a pick?
I do, and I like the Bengals. I think the Bengals are going to get it done. I think it's going to be pretty high scoring. Give me like 31-28.
Oh, man. I think that would be a lot of fun. I'm nervous about the Bengals winning this game because I have the Bengals too. It's all, you see all these things up against Cincinnati, whether it's Von Miller, whether it's Aaron Donald, this defense, Jalen Ramsey. Joe Burrow finds a way, and you can't doubt the Cincinnati Bengals at this point. They're my pick too, and we'll just have to wait and see. But again, it's just another advertising point. It's another selling point for people for recruits to come to Ohio State. Really, it's that logo, it's that name. That's all it needs. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Scarlet and Gray Report podcast. Thank you to Jack Emerson. You can follow him on Twitter at Jack Emers, not son, Emers. You can follow me on Twitter at Colin Gay 17. Follow us on Twitter at OhioST_rivals. Subscribe. Subscribe to the site. We have a lot of content coming each and every day. Read Jack's stuff also at The Lantern. He does good work there with Jacob Benj. But until next time, see you guys on the message board.